Welcome to this lecture which covers Python data types. We'll start with numbers. Numbers are critical for data science and machine learning because all the models work by using numbers. So all the calculations are performed using numbers. And as we probably know that numbers are generally real and complex. The real numbers are integers and floats. We will not be covering or using complex numbers. It's outside the scope of this course. So let's look at what integers are. Integers are your typical non-decimal values like 1, 2, 3, where there is no decimal point, so they're not fractions like 3 divided by 4 or anything other similar. And they can, of course, be positive, negative, zero. So these are your typical integers. You can see some of the examples here: -6, 0. Now, and floats are basically the floating point numbers, which means that you have a decimal point after the uh, integer number, which means that, for example, a number like 0.75 is it's actually a fraction 3 by 4, but you can also write it as 0.75, and that's your decimal component. And again, they can be positive and negative, so we'll be using both integers and floating point numbers. Just to give you an idea what a complex number is, they have an imaginary component j because they cannot be expressed as real numbers. That's an example there. There are different scenarios under which you need to use complex numbers, but again, they're not required for this course. You can perform all the standard mathematical operations like addition, division, multiplication, modulus operators on all the different data types, and we'll be showing you some examples on that. A couple of points to note is that division by default returns a floating point number in Python. Uh, so another thing to note here is that you have certain notations for special mathematical operations, like power of is denoted by 2 stars, so 6 to the power of 4. You can do it by writing 6 star star 4. Um, and there is also a math module within Python, which provides access to a lot of the commonly used mathematical functions. So let's now look at some examples to understand how this works. So, if you type a very basic example is type a number 99 and it prints that. I did a simple division of 23 by 7, and as you can see, the result is a fractional value uh, with a decimal point on it. Now, if I do a simple multiplication, you get that. You can do simple additions and subtractions. You can multiply negative and positive values. So it gives you those different results. And then you can combine that and perform a combination of different mathematical operations. And if you see the result of that, you can see your output on that. For example, 3 by 4 is 0.75. So that's your fractional number, and it's being represented as a decimal value. And similarly, if you'd adding and subtracting a integer and a floating point, the result is a floating point number. Uh, and now to look at the example of the power of function, you can see I'm trying to print what is the 2 to the power of 4, which we know is 2 into 2 into 2 into 2, which would give you 16. Here you can represent it by using 2 with the star star 4, and if you print that, you get your result as 16. One of the useful functions you'll find within Python is the type function. It tells you what is the type of the data types. In this case, we want to know what is that number, what is that data type internally in the language of that number. So if I type 350 and I want to see what its type is, you will see it is an integer because it doesn't have a decimal value. Similarly, if I use a decimal value, which is your floating point number, and I type the print on it, you can see it gives you a float, so it's a floating value. Just to give you an example of a complex number, we've created this complex number m, and if you type the a value of that and seeing the type of that, you'd see the class is complex. So what you see here is that It's very easy within Python to perform all your basic mathematical functions and to see the results on that. Uh, Another thing we wanted to show you was that you can change the data type of a number by casting it. So casting is basically converting one data type to another. So you might need to convert a fractional value to a simple integer value. So in this case, you want to convert 83.5 to its integer value because you don't need the fractions in the calculations. This can become useful when you have a nested calculation. If the result of one calculation is passed to another and then that to another, the floating point values can make a big difference at the final result. So, do you want to control that? Maybe yes. And then in that case, how do you do it? That's used by doing the casting of the data type. Similarly, what you can do, you might have to do it the other way around. You might need to convert an integer into a float. So all you have to do is just cast it into a float, and 98 now becomes 98.0. So now let's look at some examples to understand this casting operation. What we can see here is that we have a floating number which is 83.52, and we want to convert that into an integer, so we cast it as an integer. And just to see the output here, you'll see it's been converted into um, 83. Uh, Similarly, you have a integer value 98, and now you want to convert it into a floating point number. Then what you do is just cast it as a float, and what you get is 98.0. So effectively, it's now a floating point number. So that's all about numbers. Um, you can always check the Python guides for all the different number types and mathematical functions. So here we are showing you the math module library, which performs all the basic math functions. So you don't have to create them yourself. You can just make calls to them and get all the different values you need in terms of the results you might want to do. And again here, which is the full Python tutorial, it contains some very good examples and more details around numbers. And as we go through the course, we'll show you what are the other useful sections within this guide. Okay, thank you.